Mike Taylor já é de casa. Esta será a terceira participação dele na BrazilJS. Mike é engenheiro de compatibilidade web na Mozilla. Ele trabalha de casa, em Austin, no Texas. Antes de trabalhar na Mozilla, Mike prestou serviços para o Opera.
Okay, so that was the version of me with more hair, com mais cabelo. Olá, boa tarde. Meu nome é Mike e eu acho que eu vou palestrar em inglês. Desculpem. So I'm gonna speak in English because I'm terrified of speaking in Portuguese. So my talk is everybody here, more or less? We just had lunch. People are tired. People are barriga cheia, right? De barriga. That means your stomach is full for the gringos. Hold on, let me do full screen. So we have like a little exercise here. Let's just bear with me. So it's navigator.xuxa.play. Okay. So everyone. Okay, so all right. There's 45 minutes of that, so if we run out of time, we'll go back. So I'm Mike. I work for Mozilla. I used to work for Opera, which is a different web browser. I hooked you guys up with a download code. So right now, Firefox is free just for the next 2 hours. Use the code BrazilJS. And please don't tweet this. Like legal and marketing would freak out. So my talk is about web compatibility, which is kind of a funny term, and it's not something that developers really think about. It's something that browsers think about. And you can think of it, I'll try to explain this. So I'm working on this metaphor, and I don't know if it works yet, but So you've got this family, right? Something that's super important to you is like this drink, this juice. And what's the most important drink in Rio Grande do Sul? It's chimarrão. That's right. But it doesn't come in that cup. So we're just going to call this juice, right? So the web is like this juice. It's super good. It's super important, and you want to share it with everybody, right? Everybody should have access to web juice. So I hate this metaphor already. Can we start again? No. So everybody, even this. This weird little kid, he deserves the web. He deserves the web. But sometimes the experience that people receive on the web is different. So, mis amigos de Peru pueden traducir. I forget Spanish. Check this out. So you'll see on English, this is somewhere in Florida, right? Like it's a 19-minute ride to the university. On the left is the Spanish translation. For whatever reason, there are two paths here. I don't get this, but presumably it's the same road. So there's two experiences for the same exact destination, which is sad, right? Thinking of your web juice. Here's another example of this where you have an experience on a really important website in Japan on the left. Not so great, right? Like what would you do if you opened this website? You would buy a new phone. On the right is what it would look like in Safari iPhone. Raise your hand if you own an iPhone. Okay. So not very many people. I personally can't afford one, but they're good phones. So this type of thing doesn't just happen in Japan, right? OkCupid is a great company. I have no idea what they do. That's my official story. Similar type of thing, right? You have two different experiences. So what does that mean in terms of web compatibility? So we're gonna kind of get our hands dirty. We're gonna look into under the sink of the web. This guy's a plumber. So we're going to become web plumbers for the next little bit. And we're going to look at the types of issues that browsers run into when trying to make the web work for everyone. And it'll get a little messy, and hopefully it'll make sense. So JavaScript, right? You're here at BrazilJS. Raise your hand if you love JavaScript. Love it. Raise your hand if you kind of like JavaScript. All right. It's okay. This is a support group. So prototypes are a thing which make JavaScript a really interesting, and they're very simple. So done, okay. So we all understand JavaScript prototypes, right? We've got some kind of base object that they inherit from. I found that last night. And objects that inherit from that base object, they're connected, right? And so they can share methods and properties, and if you change the one at top, it'll affect the one down at the bottom, etc. So in the language, JavaScript the language, as we try to add new things to it and make it less terrible or more awesome, depending on your point of view, bad stuff can happen. So here was an ES6 proposal for a string prototype contains, right? This nice little convenience method so you don't have to do index of forever and ever and ever. Keep hitting that. And the method signature is real simple. You've got your search string, and then you've got this position argument, say start searching at the beginning or in the middle or whatever. And you can see this example, BrazilJS contains BR. That's true, but that's not true if you started looking at the second character. So we implemented this in Firefox, and it was amazing for 10 minutes. Because it turns out MooTools, raise your hand if you've ever used MooTools. Okay. Very good. Bless your hearts. They had a contains method, and they added that to the string prototype. And the method signature is different. It doesn't really matter if we understand what happens here, but you can see the types at least are different. You've got a string, and then the second one is another string, whereas ES6 wants a number, and so all hell breaks loose. And this broke a bank in Germany within minutes. So we have to pull that out. You can't break the web, right? That can be bad. And so how do we solve this in the browser? We just rename it. It's a very elegant solution. So now contains doesn't exist, and we have include. So that's one thing we can do as browsers. We can say oh crap, that's a bad name. Let's rename it. Things can get a little bit crazier. Is anyone familiar with the with statements? A couple people. Thank you so much for raising your hands. I know that's annoying, but it's fun for me. So with statements are a way, don't even try to learn this. It's terrible. Just listen to me. With statements are a way that you can extend the scope of a statement. So if you're using a bare word, it'll look, so here on values, it's going to look for a thing.values. Doesn't matter if you understand it. So if you had this object called thing, and thing.values is lol, if you use that method, get values, it would return lol because it was using the with and blah, blah, blah. If you passed in an array today in a web browser, what would happen is instead of getting maybe nan or undefined or null, you would get this function, values, and that's confusing. So we're going to learn how scope lookups happens in with statements, right? So we're looking up the regular lexical scope, but if an object gets passed in that has a prototype, we'll look along the prototype as well. Just pretend you understood that. Here's some code from a library called Sencha Touch. Amazing mobile library a few years back. They had this code, and so Sencha was used everywhere. So we implemented array prototype values. It turns out it broke, right? And so we added this magical thing called unscopables, where we more or less hacked the language using something called a meta object protocol, and we just said hey, if you're going to look up a scope in a with statement, don't look for this property. Like, super hacky. It made websites work, so it's great. There we go. DOM. So we're done with JavaScript. Like, that might have, I think I have a duplicate ID in here. So let's look at the DOM. Personally, I love the DOM. Like, it's my favorite, and that's not even sarcastic. So here's a website. Let's see. Hold on, I broke my slides. I'm gonna fix them real fast. This is live coding, right? Live fixing. Where'd we go? It's totally unrehearsed. Lampion is crazy. If I was reading that at 1:30 a.m. last night. He was kind of crazy. Where are we at? Cool. Sorry about that. So, okay. So looking at the DOM. So you're in New York and you're trying to view this sushi restaurant. And so you open up in your Firefox or Android phone. And have you ever seen a thing like this that says like, oh, we don't support your orientation. Please rotate your phone. Like that. If you've ever done that, please stop. It's terrible. Like we can do better. Okay, no big deal. Like you have the capability to rotate your phone, right? So you rotate your phone and it still doesn't do anything, which makes no sense. So there's a bug here, right? And the bug here is this API called window.orientation. And in this website, it says if window.orientation is not equal to 0, we're gonna call this function called bad orientation because landscape view is bad, according to these designers, right? So if window.orientation is not equal to 0, and when you have a property on an object that doesn't exist, it's undefined, right? So keep that in mind. So now we're gonna do a quiz. This is a 3D quiz. Does anybody have 3D glasses? Okay, we'll do it in 2D. Undefined is not equal 0. Is that true or false? True, I think, right? True, I can't remember. I put this in the console, right? So we're always going to call bad orientation. So no matter what happened on your phone, you're always calling this stupid function, which is terrible. And so now you ask yourself, so like, what does the spec say? So Apple released window.orientation in the iPhone, and it's actually kind of a cool property. If we turn to the spec, just kidding, they forgot to write a spec. So I wrote the spec, and reverse engineered this, and we put this into Firefox. Microsoft Edge did the same thing. They probably, I don't know if they used my spec or not. That's kind of what you have to do. We say like, okay, Firefox users and Edge users, they deserve that amazing sushi rotate experience. And now this is part of the web, so we just put it into web browsers. Okay, so that's the DOM. Let's talk about the CSS object model, which is almost as cool as the DOM. We'll do another quiz. So these are getters on what's called the CSS style declaration object, which is a fancy name for that little word. You know, when you do element.style, that's all that means. So now we're going to do the quiz. All right, so which of these work today in nightly versions or of Firefox, Edge, and Chrome? So any hands? Let's start easy. Any hands for number 4? Okay, it's not a trick question, right? Yeah, number 4 works. Anybody think number 3 works? 1 or 2 crazy people. Anybody thinks number 2 works? Everyone's so nervous. Anybody thinks number 1 works? Okay. So it turns out they all work, which is crazy, right? So there's a long, ugly history to why we have to implement all these weird variants, right? Originally the spec said, hey, you should do number 4, or if you have a prefix, you should do number 2. And Apple was like, lol, we're going to do whatever we want. And then Chrome inherited that gift from them, and here we are. And so we want web pages to work, and so we just put it in the web platform. So those work in web browsers. Now, what does the spec say to do correctly today? I won't make you raise your hand because, surprise, the spec says these are all okay now. Like, we've given up. And so you should feel this like sigh of relief. Like, oh, that's a good thing. I don't have to think anymore. But you should actually just use number 4, just FYI. And it turns out, so we had to add these things to the web platform, this thing called a WebKit cased attribute. And that's the one, that's number 1. See, I've got some stray quotes there at the end. Because the spec said to do uppercase, but then Apple was like, lowercase is cooler. This is a web typography talk also. Lowercase is cool. You can write that down. A camel-cased attribute, that's the right thing to do. And then we had to add this thing called a dashed attribute, which is people were like really love these dash WebKit dash things, and so they were sticking them in there. And it just has to work, right? Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about CSS, and I apologize in advance. You didn't pay money to talk about CSS. This one's on me. It's free. Okay. So if you had to guess why that was broken in Gecko on the left, like, what would you guess? I'm going to wait here for you to yell something out. That's right. The sprite is broken. Like, the positioning is screwed up, right? Like, background position X, background position Y. That's absolutely right. They were using WebKit background position X, background position Y. There was a brief period in the world of CSS where background position X and background position Y were non-standard. Those have been standardized now, and those are implemented across the board, the unprefixed versions. And so we also had to add the prefix versions. Here, like, you should have this natural, like, anything, whenever on a web page something is super terrible, immediately you should think Flexbox, right? Terrible Flexbox. Repeat after me. No, I'm kidding. Flexbox is good. It has a really ugly history, and there's like 5 different versions of Flexbox. This was version 2. I have no idea. So we have to add support for this. And you remember when I said that was Gecko and that's an iPhone? This is actually Gecko, and this is Gecko. Just adding support for those things. Suddenly, people in Japan can see the web page, which is great. Here's another fun little feature. So we added support for gradients as well, and suddenly we realized we broke some websites. Same thing happened in Edge. So that's not normal. So if this is what this looks like in Chrome, and it's really subtle, but you can see there's this gradient effect in the text where it says the best payment flow on web and mobile. And that's super hot, right? Like, right now, I want to buy whatever it is that they are selling. It's amazing. So we need that to work too. And it turns out, so we added support for WebKit, old crappy WebKit gradients. And then we were like, oh, what's this WebKit background clip thing? And I would ask you what spec that was in, but it turns out I had to write it myself because Apple forgot to spec it. They're really busy. So we added that to the platform, and there's this other text field color thing. Maybe we'll talk about that. So that exists, and now today in Firefox, you can have these fancy gradients, and you can feel great. Also works in Edge, which is cool. So this is like, despite having the worst name ever, this is interoperable on the modern web today to get this effect. And the CSS working group is going to have something better than this eventually. But for now, this works. I'm not saying you should use it ever. Please don't. But it works. And then there's this other thing called WebKit text trope. So I wasn't kidding. This was a typography talk. And this just allows you to. So you look. This will illustrate the concept of progressive enhancement, right? Like, this is the base experience. This is Bloomberg.com. They always have like wacky web pages. This is what this used to look like in Firefox, but in Chrome, they got this amazing, right? Like round of applause. Wow. So into that. You've got this gradient effect, but you also have the text stroke effect, which is cool. Like, I know I sound like a jerk and I'm being facetious and designers hate me. This is actually really cool. And we can do it in print. Let's do it on the web. Oh, I blew it. So anyways, we added that to the spec. So at this point, like, you might be feeling a little nervous because I've just spent like 20 minutes talking about adding all these WebKit prefixes to the web platform. And you probably read from all years of thought leadership that failed, that using vendor prefixes are bad, right? So raise your hand if you're a little nervous and you think this is terrible. The people from the W3C, yeah, cool. What's up? My specs are in the what working group. I do what I want. Just kidding, but not really. So this, like, you should feel some existential, I don't know what the right word is, just like discomfort, because it's ugly, right? It's ugly, and it was not supposed to happen this way, but it did, and I don't know whose fault it is. It's not my fault, but remember, it might be my fault, I don't know. Remember the web, right? This web juice. Everybody deserves the web juice. Like, it's worth it to me to make the web platform a little bit more ugly so the web works for people, and that's what's important. People come before browser vendors, come before standards, come before, I forget what's next. That was the point of that, yeah. Okay, so you're feeling stressed out. I forget why this is a waffle. We didn't just add these things, right? Like I've showed you this spec. Like we're trying to do this the right way, where we correctly specify this stuff. So if someone wants to invent a new browser engine, they can interoperably add support for this. If Apple wants to like pitch in and help, that's cool. Open invitation. After I've made fun of them for 20 minutes. It's not a whole lot of stuff, just a few kind of WebKit prefix thingies. And there's some other related spec work that's going on in the Wikig. I don't know how to pronounce that. This is like the Blink's version of file system API stuff that Edge and Firefox now support. We're working on better APIs, but it's like, let's just declare bankruptcy. So that's the first part of the talk. This is a 3-hour talk, by the way. Sometimes we also remove things from the browser, and this doesn't happen very often, but you have to think of this and be aware. Like, so show modal dialog was this API. Raise your hand if you've ever written or used that API. Okay. So the os dinosaurs, right? Like, this is old school. It was really crappy, and it paused JavaScript execution while you got this window to open, and it was just like a burden to maintain. All the web browsers removed it. So we actually broke Outlook 2009. I'm sorry. You should upgrade your Outlook. App cache. So Jake Archibald has some good thought leadership on app cache. Like, don't use it. It's not good. Use service workers. We want to remove this from the platform. It might, like, people kind of get freaked out. We're not going to break your web pages, but if you could do me a favor and just like remove this, that'd be great. One day this is going to go away. It might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, but that will disappear. IsIndex is another little funny HTMLism that disappeared. And we're not going to talk about it. So sometimes we add things to the web and it breaks. Sometimes rarely we remove things and things can break. So what can you do, right? Like, how can you make this less terrible if you were the Charlie Brown saying good grief, right? So like, read standards, optionally use them, but just like read them so you're familiar with what the web is supposed to be like. There's really smart people who work on these standards, and in theory, browsers are implementing from them. Can you guys raise your hand if you've ever read from a spec? Okay, that's awesome. So that's like 14%. Next year, we're going to come back, and that should be like 90%. So you have homework. you should be testing, right? This world of like only working in one web browser shouldn't exist. And I think that's really obvious to everyone, but there are real constraints, like budget constraints, time constraints. I don't actually have a Windows machine or an iPhone, so there's ways to mitigate this, and if you just Google search that, you can figure that out. I forget why that's there. It looks cool though. You should be using pre-release channels to test your apps, right? You don't have to use them every day, but when you're going to release a new site, like open up Dev Edition, open up Edge Insider, open up Safari Tech Preview, Chrome Canary, Opera Developer, and if things start breaking, you know that something's up. Like, it's very possible that Firefox broke your website because we introduced a regression, because sometimes they let me check in code, so it's possible. And when that happens, you should be reporting bugs. I'm going to make you raise your hands again. Raise your hands if you've ever reported a bug to browsers. Okay, that's actually really good. It's scary. The UX and UI is terrible. Like, Bugzilla is a hot mess. But you should do it because it's so valuable, and browser vendors really, really want this. And so you can get these links and click on them, but seriously, like, even if you just drop a URL and say, like, when I click on the button, nothing happens, that's a crappy bug report, but I'll take it. I work on this website called webcompat.com. It's, we're not going to talk about that, but basically it's just a way where you can say, like, this site is broken, help. And we, a group of volunteers, we do the work to diagnose things, and we say, like, oh, hey, this is a Chrome bug, and we go funnel that to them. This is a Firefox bug, we funnel that to those people. And it's also an open source project, so if anyone has nothing to do, come talk to me. Or finally, you can just like shoot me an email, which is great. So that's my talk. These slides are a little old. That's an inside joke for Brazilians. Orkut was awesome. So thank you.